when nobody is competing. You could not be describing a monopoly more clearly if you were wearing a metal top hat while driving a metal car after winning second prize in a beauty contest. Maybe it's because of their lack of competition that they get away with providing such shitty service. We pay more for our internet service than almost anybody else on Earth, and yet the download speeds we get lag behind Estonia. Estonia, a country where, from the looks of it, they still worry about Shrek attacks. Is it any wonder that in a massive recent customer satisfaction surveys, Comcast and Time Warner Cable came in dead last. And when you look at the companies that were scored better than them, people were basically saying, yes, Bank of America took my home. Yes, Taco Bell gave me diarrhea. And sure, GM tried to kill me. But Time Warner and Comcast are the worst. They are the worst. And I know. The cable companies will say, oh, they support net neutrality protections, or they remain committed to the open internet, or just the tip. But let me remind you, they also say that they'll be at your house between 2 and 6 tomorrow afternoon. And does any part of you really expect them to turn up? And yet, our government looks set to end net neutrality and let these companies run hog wild, and we're just going to let them. And you know why? It all comes back to this.
It seeks comment on ways to construe additional language in Section 706 and even suggests using Section 230B to broaden the scope of the Commission's usurped authority.
Oh my God, how are you still so dull? And that's the problem. The cable companies have figured out the great truth of America. If you want to do something evil, put it inside something boring. Apple could put the entire text of Mein Kampf inside the iTunes user agreement, and you just go, agree. And that's why advocates should not be talking about protecting net neutrality. They shouldn't even use that phrase. They should call it preventing cable company f***ery, because that is what it is, and it might actually compel people to want to do something. And the interesting thing here is there might actually be something you can still do.
The FCC will be taking public comment for 120 days.
That's right. The FCC are literally inviting internet comments at this address. And at this point, and I can't believe I'm about to do this, I would like to address the internet commenters out there directly. Good evening, monsters. This may be the moment you've spent your whole lives training for. You have been out there ferociously commenting on dance videos of adorable 3-year-olds, saying things like, every child could dance like this little loser after 1 week of practice. Or you've been polluting Frozen's Let It Go with comments like, Ice Castle would give her hypothermia and she'd dead in an hour. Or, and I know you've done this one, commenting on video on this show saying, fuck this arsehole anchor, go suck your president's d***. You're just friends with the terrorists. Now, I don't know what any of that means. But I don't think it's a compliment. But this is the moment you were made for, commenters. Like Ralph Macchio. You've been honing your skills, waxing cars and painting fences. Well, guess what? Now it's time to do some fucking karate. For once in your life, we need you to channel that anger, that badly spelled bile that you normally reserve for unforgivable attacks on actresses you seem to think have put on weight, or politicians that you disagree with, or photos of your ex-girlfriend getting on with her life, or non-white actors being cast as fictional characters. And I'm talking to you, Ron Paul fan 2016, and you, One Direction forever, and I'm talking to you, One Direction sucks balls. We need you to get out there and for once in your lives, focus your indiscriminate rage in a useful direction. Seize your moment, my lovely trolls. Turn on spark and fly, my pretties!
Of net neutrality.
But net neutrality is about more than just speed. At its heart, it is the principle that internet service providers, or ISPs like these guys, should not be able to engage in any sort of fuckery that limits or manipulates the choices you make online. It also helps ensure a level playing field so that big companies cannot undermine small companies before they can take off. And without it, Ancestry.com could easily crush my new site, Just Tell Me If I'm Related to a Nazi.com. It's like Ancestry.com, except you get to skip all the bullshit. Net neutrality is objectively boring, and that used to work to ISP's advantage. But more people know what it is now, which is why some companies have started putting out statements trumpeting their support for a free and open internet. In fact, Verizon even created a video to calm any concerns that you might have.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Jeremy here with Craig Silliman, who is our general counsel and leads our public policy group. Let's jump right into it. Is the FCC going to kill what we know as the open internet rules or net neutrality?
The FCC is not talking about killing the net neutrality rules. In fact, not we nor any other ISP are asking them to kill the open internet rules. All they're doing is looking to put the open internet rules in an enforceable way on a different legal footing.
Now that sounds reasonable. And why wouldn't you trust the commitment to open access of a man sitting at a table literally blocking an entire hallway? But while a different legal footing sounds pretty benign, it is not. And it is also worth understanding how net neutrality landed on its current legal footing, because it happens to directly involve Verizon. So let me explain, and unfortunately to do that, I have to introduce you to two terms even more boring than net neutrality, specifically Title I and Title II of the Communications Act of 1934, the equivalent of chasing an Ambien with a shot of chloroform. But here is very broadly what happened. Back in 2010, the FCC wrote net neutrality rules governing ISPs, which at the time were regulated under the less strict Title I. And the companies found those net neutrality rules inconvenient. In fact, Verizon successfully sued the FCC, arguing that it didn't have enough authority to enforce those rules. And the court ruled that if the FCC did want strong, enforceable net neutrality, their best option would be to reclassify ISPs under Title II, which allows for much stronger oversight. So the FCC did that, and the fact they did was huge. So when Verizon claims, hey, we love the open internet, but why don't we just put it on a different legal footing? It's basically O.J. Simpson asking why you won't let him hold any of your samurai swords. Come on, Juice. You know why. You, of anyone, should know why. And the ISPs now have a powerful ally on their side, because Trump has appointed a new head of the FCC, and it is this guy.
Ajay Pai is known for being anti-regulation, pro-merger. Last month, he said he wanted to, quote, take a weed whacker to current FCC rules and predicted net neutrality's, quote, days are numbered.
Wow, okay. Days are numbered and take a weed whacker are serial killer talk. So that is pretty ominous. When the Code of Federal Regulations looks out of its window at night, there's just Ajit Pai standing silently, holding his weed whacker, waiting for his chance. But the dangerous thing about Pi is that he presents himself as a fun, down-to-earth nerd. The kind of guy whose Twitter feed is full of quotes from The Big Lebowski. He quotes it all the time. And look, quoting The Big Lebowski is fine in certain contexts. For example, if you're an actor and it's 1998 and you're filming the movie The Big Lebowski. But it is completely intolerable in any other context. And that's not his only fun guy at the office traits. Just watch his very first press conference as chairman.
I would be happy to take questions from the panel.
Monty Taylor, Com Daily. How do you plan to examine?
Yes. Ajit Pai is the kind of guy who has a fun, oversized novelty mug, and he is really proud of it. Because here he is showing it off to a reporter, here he is showing it off to his Twitter feed, and in his first speech to his staff as commissioner, he said, "I love walking into my office, pouring about a gallon of coffee into my infamous Reese's Peanut Butter Cups mug and starting my day." And you heard right, he described his own mug as infamous, which is offensive for two reasons. First, at no point should you be describing your own fun mug aloud in the company of other adults. And second, it's a fucking mug. Calling a mug infamous is like calling your neti pot a real panty dropper. In no context can that be remotely true. But for all of Pai's doofy, hey, I'm just like you guys persona, there are some things about him that you should really know. He's a former lawyer for Verizon, and despite being a smart man, he sure loves to play dumb over why ISPs were ever moved to Title II.
For decades before 2015, we had a free and open internet. Indeed, the free and open internet developed and flourished under light touch regulation. We weren't living in some digital dystopia before the partisan imposition of a massive plan hatched in Washington saved all of us.
Now, that is true. 2015 was not a digital dystopia for anyone, with the possible exception of...
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Evans Library and our After Hours event on Net Neutrality. We just played a little bit of comedy to get us all in a good mood, and this is the final After Hours event for the semester, so I'm glad you're all here, and it happens to fall on Open Access Week. So we've been celebrating open access all week, and that's part of why we chose this topic for this event. So tonight you're going to learn a little bit more about net neutrality than you already have by watching this video. We have two great speakers for you tonight. And first we're going to hear from Dr. Dimitri Uran. He is an assistant professor in the School of Arts and Communication. He teaches courses in political and technical communication. He has a PhD from the University of Tennessee. And aside from teaching and research, he's developed a keen interest in international education. So, welcome, Dr. Grant.
For a nice introduction. Thank you all for a warm welcome. And that's really loud. John Oliver is always a tough act to follow. I hope my jokes will be just as good, if present though. While I'm doing that, you can maybe locate one of my students around the room, and they will attest to the fact that I never use PowerPoints. So that's a very interesting experience for me. I have no idea why I decided to do that. I found John Oliver, will spot our second speaker is going to be coming in. Tough acts to follow, so I need all the help I can get. So I'm going to use it. So net neutrality, right? We're talking about it during the Open Access Week. What is the connection between net neutrality and open access? Well, I will tell you to start with. But what I will try and discuss with you is the roots of what this net neutrality problem. What the heck is it to begin with? Do we really know what net neutrality is? Do we know what to do about it? Do we know what exactly is going on? Well, it feels like for the most of us the answer is, fortunately, no. Unless you have to dig deeper into it. It's likely that you wouldn't find much information about net neutrality whatsoever. An interesting quiz conducted by Pew Research was asking people a bunch of questions about the web to measure their web IQ. They called it the web IQ quiz. And one of the questions on the quiz asked people whether or not they knew what net neutrality was. 61% of the respondents said, well, chose the correct answer. Now, can we say that 61% of the people who happened to stumble across Pew Research's online quiz would be a good representative sample? Not necessarily. 61% they chose one of 4 options. Now, 4 options. Chances are that you could simply guess, right? So if we subtract the quarter of the potential guesses, our percentage goes even lower down. Now, if you look at the options themselves, it does make sense to choose the correct option at some point. So you don't necessarily need to be aware of net neutrality as an issue. Coming onto the Pew Research website, you don't need to know what it is. You can still guess it, and yet so few of us do. You can toy with the quiz if you want. Pew Research will still have the link on the website. The quiz is still operational. You can measure your own web IQ and see if you can choose the correct answer for net neutrality after this presentation, after our discussion. But why is that so? What is the reason behind this weird phenomenon? Arguably, it is something important. Hey, John Oliver is talking about it. That's a big deal. But just like as John Oliver noted, if you put something boring, if you put something evil inside something boring, you can easily get it done. For those of you who came in a little bit later, for those of you who came in a little bit later, you probably missed the first video that was being played while we were waiting here. John Oliver was making a point for boredom of the topic and the fact that it's commissions and regulatory bodies that are dealing with it and speaking about it in very complicated language, throwing around boring terminology and really, really boring intonations. Makes it a little bit not as sexy of a topic. Which brings us to the point to another piece of information, piece of research that Pew put together, where they found that, well, very little news coverage of that topic, even during the times where crucial decisions were being made on it. Right over there, 2014, close to May, and then July, where the comments were being collected by FCC from the public about net neutrality and how to regulate or deregulate the internet. The news coverage was very sparse, if existent at all. However, they found Pew Research found a rather strong correlation between, well, the times when John Oliver came out with his little comedy acts and spikes in FCC comments. Spikes in comments on the FCC website, and as well in searches on the web about net neutrality. What is interesting about those searches, something does work, is of course these very same spikes. These very same spikes happen just after John Oliver was airing his shows, and again, they are correlated with media attention to the topic, but there was very little coverage on the news, very little coverage on television and in the newspapers. Now, these spikes are extremely high, and they can tell you that, well, maybe people have learned something about what net neutrality was, and judging by one of the more popular related queries, related search queries on Google, you could figure out where the connection is, what people were actually looking for, what brought them to this very important but yet extremely boring topic. So we know very little about it. All we know, or most of us know, we know from John Oliver, and he made a huge ado about it, and now there are millions and millions of comments flooding FCC's website and arguably paralyzing their work. But should we care about it? Why should we? What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that we are talking here about control. But the bottom line of trying to not allow internet providers gain too much control over the internet is basically protecting, in most cases, your freedoms. Freedoms of, in many cases, marginalized groups. People with lower income, people who will be affected by the fallout of the getting rid of the net neutrality, main principles of net neutrality, which could be boiled down to two things, really. You are not supposed to, as an internet service provider, ISP, you're not supposed to throttle content, and you're not supposed to block content unless you produced it. You can do whatever you want with whatever you produced. You should not be throttling or blocking somebody else's content. Why is that important for you as an end consumer? We'll get to it here in a second. But a little picture here about the groups that might be affected by it a little bit more than others. People who may not necessarily be able to should not have been doing off topic a little bit. We will get to those people in a second here, but speaking of caring about FCC, about net neutrality and caring about regulating internet, again, from Pew Research, we'll see that Americans do care. Most of them find internet either essential or at least very important in their lives. Very few people don't find it important. Very few people disagree with, or at least there is a political party divide on this topic, but many people agree that there should be a involvement of different types in the broadband business, and in particular, this particular graph illustrates people's support for municipalities creating their own broadband networks. So trying to intervene and not allow for the situation where ISPs basically parcel out zones of influence and create monopolies. Now, so some sides of that story, some aspects of the issue, people are very vocal about, and they would want to not have that much control in the hands of ISP. On the other hand, net neutrality, we know very little about. Now, why should we care? There could be a good number of different effects. If internet service providers are allowed to block and throttle content, they will do so and lift their brakes that they put on the content, or lift the blockage on the content that you want to get access to. After you pay additional costs to them, they can justify it as the way they want to, and that will mean for you as an end consumer, very likely easily established hiking prices. Content providers can charge you as well. So your internet provider will tell Netflix that they will slow down their channel, their broadband, if they do not pay an additional charge. Well, the networks probably will, and they will recoup the cost from end consumer, from you. When you're shopping, when you're looking for goods online, you probably are trying to find something that is cheaper, something, the place where you will get away with a lower price. Well, if Walmart or Amazon do pay Comcast for good broadband bandwidth, then their searches will come on top. Right? Comcast can block smaller companies who cannot afford to pay additional charges, and you will not be able to find lower prices. Right? Just because Google paid to the internet provider and somebody else didn't, or somebody else will be limited in speed, and thus your habit of, say, searching on Bing or the other way around will be disrupted. Shopping on Amazon, well, if they fall out of favor with your internet provider, which is likely to be only one in your area that provides a high-quality, high-speed internet, guess what? Their site is going to be slow, or potentially, it could potentially be slower. Smaller companies that cannot compete with bigger names like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so on and so forth for the internet speed will likely suffer, and their level of competitiveness will drop, which means, again, for you as an end consumer, fewer choices and less control over price for goods and services, because fewer companies can easily monopolize markets. And we'll get here to the marginalized groups. Now, companies like Comcast and other internet service providers say, well, but we won't do it. We will not use this freedom once we get it. We will not throttle content. We will not block it. Sounds to me very similar to a situation where I would be arguing with my parents for car keys and going on to and on and on and on and on and on about me absolutely having to have access to car keys after midnight on weekends, and then promising them that I will not use these car keys. Why on earth do I need the keys then if I'm promising not to use them? So a little bit of an interesting and tricky situation here, where we don't really have a precedent. It has not happened yet, but for some reason, some entities, ISPs mostly, fighting tooth and nail for the possibility of it. The possibility of it may or may not result in issues for you as a consumer, and ISPs promise that they will not, but why are you fighting them? Another problem with it is something that I started talking about, not having recognized the slide that is coming in, has to do with non-economic relationships. A little bit of a different exchange, a political exchange, political system, democracy. Why should you care about ISPs gaining control over internet? Because internet, many would say, is very, very much crucial for development and functioning of any democratic society. One of the organizations that is very concerned with the fact that net neutrality principles are being threatened, that the light hand regulations that are being fought to be brought back would enable some entities to gain control over internet, because they understand and realize the importance of free access to internet as the global communication network in democratic societies. If you would like to, you could certainly search Freedom House's reports on internet freedom in different countries. Among them is the United States. The fact that it is color-coded means that there is some level of risk already that Freedom House is talking about. And part of that risk of suppressed freedom of expression on the internet that Freedom House is talking about, they're attributing to the potential of the live hand regulation. Somebody will gain control over the content, which means you lose that control. You will not be able to disseminate information as freely as you wanted to. You will not learn what you wanted to from the internet as easily, and so on and so forth. So potential fallout is somewhat significant and not very bright. Now to just recap a little bit how we got where we got and where we are right now in terms of net neutrality and deregulation and changing what we have right now. Net neutrality, the principles of net neutrality, were formulated by Dr. Tim Wu at the Columbia Law School. They were not enforceable at the moment when they were formulated, and they had to do, for the most part, with the potential for internet providers to block or throw out content, speed up, slow down somebody's content based on whatever desires they have. Somebody paid them more, somebody paid them less, or simply block it. If Comcast produces their own content, they have their own TV show, they will block their competitors' content that's similar in order to gain competitive edge. Fair market relationships are possible in this case on the internet, and bigger companies, and especially internet providers, have gotten to the point where they can do it very easily. So FCC got concerned and used Dr. Wu's principles to start formulating some sort of a line of defense, some sort of a way of enforcing it. This is how we got to the 1934 regulations that were amended and changed to fit the modern reality in internet providers. So one of the arguments that anti-net neutrality people will be making is that the regulations that FCC passed in 2015 were based on really old law. They have been adjusted and they will be adjusted some more. Now, those of you who came in a little later heard John Oliver joking about Tom Willard, and we have Mr. Pai right now. People at the helm of FCC who have very interesting background, very closely connected to ISPs, internet service providers, and Verizon in particular. While FCC was trying to offer a way to enforce the principles of net neutrality, they were doing it under fire from ISPs, obviously. In particular, Verizon was suing them in the process. They were going through legal battles with Verizon. Mr. Pai was there. Now, the first video, and John Oliver, you were watching, John Oliver, the guy who brought the issue into the public eye, was from 2014, when FCC was collecting comments and voting. Not much happened really back then. A little bit more happened this year. In May this year, that is why there was a second John Oliver video. FCC was voting to ban, to start working on a proposal that they can then vote on again. So they passed a proposal to start working on something to vote on. Passed it very clearly along partisan lines. 2-1 ratio of FCC commissioners voted to start changing the regulations. Right? What the changes look like, the potential changes that might come into reality. This is the document, the fact sheet that was prepared right before the vote, the May vote happened, and again the vote that was favorable to proceeding with the document. And if you look at the document in its title, I don't know if you can see, if I can zoom in easily. Yeah, I can. So the proposed rulemaking by FCC that they agreed to start working on is called Restoring Internet Freedom. The caveats here in the language. They're not talking about giving control over internet to ISPs. They're talking about internet freedom. Whose freedom, right? This is a very interesting balance here. We are talking about freedom on one side of the consumer, of the content provider as well. On the other side, we're talking about the freedom of the person who controls the pipeline through which the exchange between the consumer and the content provider happens. Their freedom. The person with the pipe, not the person who makes the content, not the person who pays for it and consumes it, but the pipeline. In an argument that will produce another boom in development of internet development, just like was happening in the past. At least that is the argument. What exactly is being proposed? Going back to what was going on during Clinton administration. Going back to what was happening where the internet was not the internet we know today. Internet without Netflix, internet without Hulu, internet without as much of the technology as we have today. That is going to be better, they say. Among other things, they say we're going to be proposing a cost-benefits analysis and also collecting comments. This is one of the things that John Oliver was encouraging people to do, is to go online and comment on what they think about net neutrality, what they think about restoring internet freedom. That created a lot of issues because many people did not take it seriously. Some people took it too seriously, created bots, basically automated algorithms that were generating these comments. So not real comments really were popping up on FCC's site quite a bit, so it turned into a mess. But the idea behind it was to collect some sort of feedback from the general public in order for them to then talk about it and make their decisions based on it. Now, chances are that a lot of these comments are going to be discarded due to the fact that they're so contaminated by senseless and fictitious comments that they're not going to be considered very much. What is going to be more important is what the commissioners will decide, who have very clear partisan affiliations. Now, the deadline for comments has passed on August 30th. The initial deadline was in mid-August for you to go on FCC's website, find the proposed regulation, comment on it, which is a cumbersome process, unless you watched John Oliver and used the link that he created, which is gofccyourself.com. So that's the shortcut. But if you don't know the shortcut, it might become a little bit troublesome for you to be able to leave that comment. Now the deadline has passed, but you still can leave a comment. It's very likely that these changes with very little alterations will be accepted by FCC and then will get further movement. But there are other mechanisms, and next step is very likely to involve courts. Right? There will be legal battles if all of that passes, which it is likely to pass. There is no need to despair just yet. Some of the things that the new attempt to liberate the internet is trying to bring to reality something that may not be very much acceptable anymore in the culture of internet consumption that we've created and got used to. People are not going to be happy with ISPs being able to control as much of the content as they would be able to, and that's probably is not going to be too much of a big effect out of it. Though visibility is there. I will stop blabbering. I was technically supposed to talk to only about 15 minutes. I'll point you out to a couple places where you can find a little bit more sensible and very interesting analysis on the topic. Among other places, Freedom House and a great deal of non-profits whose mission has to do with promotion of democracy would be concerned with this movement. Brookings Institutions, among other places, looks into the issue in a lot of detail. And one of the very interesting interviews they did with Dr. Brotman of the University of Tennessee, of all places, dwells in detail on what has happened legally in terms of this development and where legally are we going. I don't see Scott, but I do. There we go. So I'll let Scott take over, and I guess we'll take questions together towards the end.
Good evening, everyone. If you listen to the radio blurb I did for this event, I said that the name net neutrality is not very exciting for the topic it is. And my dog didn't find it exciting. I couldn't get here at lunch. I had an unplanned daycare event, I should say, that got me here a little bit late. So. By the way, my dog's name is Watson. I again named the computer after my dog. I apologize for getting a little bit late. I thought I'd talk a little bit about, from the technical side, what net neutrality is all about, and my own personal view of what will happen in the future. So, having not heard what you just heard already, I'm afraid I might repeat some of it. What is the net and neutrality part? The net, of course, means internet, not internet access, broadband access. And the reason why the government is interested in net neutrality is that, for the most part, we only have one provider. We occasionally have two, but where I live, for example, I've got one internet provider. So it is not a commodity. And whenever we have situations where we have only one provider, the government tends to want to step in and provide uniform access to content. So whether it's Spectrum or AT&T or Verizon, we have only one choice. And the neutrality part, of course, refers to the fact that all the traffic on the internet is meant to be neutral. So think of all the internet traffic that you've received. Like you're sitting at home and watching Netflix. And the internet traffic is coming to your homes like envelopes. On the other side of the envelope, it's addressed to your home. But what's inside the envelope, it says, oh, this is part of a Netflix movie. And it's being sent from a Netflix central provider all the way back to your home. And the broadband service providers, like Spectrum, they don't open up the envelope. They don't look at what's inside, they just send it along to you. Because it's neutral. They don't care what's inside, it's all the same. It's like a water utility. In fact, internet access is treated as if it was electricity or water, like a utility. But there's been cases where the broadband service providers like AT&T or Verizon or Spectrum, you want to say Bright House, Spectrum, occasionally treated some of your content as if it was sort of second class. So imagine that they had, say, an internet phone provider, and they said, we don't want you to use Vonage, which is one of those older internet phone providers. We want you to use our own. So if you're going to sign up to use Vonage as the internet service provider, we're going to dial down your internet access. So instead of going from 60 megabits, it'll be 40, 20, 10, very slow. If you're sitting there watching your Netflix, it starts getting all pixelated. Very, very slow, right? And you're confused. You say, I'm paying the same amount of money per month. Why am I getting low quality? And they say, because we have a fast lane and a slow lane now. And the fast lane is the companies like Netflix that are providing us extra money. It's no longer neutral. There's a priority line and a line for everyone else. So 2 years ago, the federal government enacted something called Title II, which is part of a very old 1934 statute. So think about this. The federal government is now regulating your internet access in the 21st century using a law from 1934, which was meant to provide oversight for Ma Bell, the old telephone companies, so that they now have the ability to provide legislative oversight over your internet access. Now, there was three major parts that they were interested in. One was you couldn't throttle down your access to your content. So whatever speed you pay for, that is the speed you get no matter what you're watching. The second is you cannot block certain websites, which has very, very large implications for things like free speech, political movements. You can imagine in other parts of the world where they have more egregious oversight of the internet, that if you're going to websites that provide, say, content related to a movement, related to the current government, they would block it. So you could never get there. And third would be things like apps on your phone. So imagine you had a phone that had an app for going for Domino's Pizza. You like Domino's Pizza. And your internet phone access comes through Verizon. But Verizon has a new regulation or a new arrangement with Papa John's. And whenever you say pizza, it goes to Papa John's. And there's absolutely no way on your phone you can go to Domino's. It always goes to Papa John's. And they say, well, if you want to go to Papa John's, get another provider. Don't bother us. So it's not neutral anymore, is it? Right? It is very much focused on who's providing them more money. Now, fortunately, those are extreme examples. We don't have that right now. We do, however, have the example that we are all have pretty much one choice when it comes to internet access. So we come back to 2015, and Title II statute, where the federal government put most of internet access under this old rule, which basically regulated internet access just like it was a telephone system. Now, our current administration is interested in repealing. It's kind of like healthcare, repeal and replace. They're interested in repealing and replacing part of that law with a new mechanism which is more open, which is you can go anywhere you want, but the providers can do whatever they want. And one of the reasons they say they want to do this is they believe that Title II stifles innovation. Because whenever you have oversight and regulation on the internet, you tend to have less innovation. And there's something to be said for that. So personally, this is when it comes to, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but what I personally think is going to happen. Before I answer that, let me ask you a following question. Do you think we should have net neutrality in one of those three facets? Do you think we should allow people to go different speeds for different content? What do you think? Many people, and I know you just saw that many people, millions of people have gone onto the website that John Oliver just mentioned. Go to fcc.gov, which has been changed, by the way, already. Whether or not they think going to a moderated internet access is a good thing or a bad thing. Think about what we do in the real world. So let's think about going to the Melbourne airport. Melbourne is a very small airport. So fortunately, we don't have too many lines. Think about when we go from there to Atlanta. If you've ever gone to the Atlanta airport when you're actually boarding a plane, but not transferring, but you're actually going from the outside in, and you walk in and you go, oh my God. You see these lines like this, right? They're like snaking all over the place for security checks. And you're like, oh, this is going to be terrible. I'm going to be like 2 hours here. Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, they're all the same. And then you see a little bit of a short line around the side. And people are like 5 people in line. You're thinking, I want to be in that line. Who are in that line? They're the people paying first class tickets. They go through fast security, fast check-in. Think about when you go to a very busy hotel, or you want to go over to any resort at Disney World. You got the long lines and you got the short lines. And the short lines are for people who are either paying a premium or they are frequent visitors. So in many, many things we do in life, we already have a mechanism where we don't pay the same amount of money and we don't wait the same amount of time, right? But we don't really complain about it. We just say, oh, well, I wish I could be in the first class line. If I had more money, I would be over there. You might be kind of cursing them under your breath, but you're like, I don't want the government involved. I just like to be over there. But when it comes to internet access, we seem to think, oh, no. We need the government involved. We need total uniform access. So I am not in the favor of any sort of agency blocking access to any website. That would start leading us towards dictatorial governments and other parts of the world where internet access is very much moderated. I've been in parts of those worlds, part of the world where you can't get on Facebook or you can't do proper Google searches, and it's very, very frustrating. You also need to know that absolutely everything you type is being monitored, down to the keystroke. And it's not a very fun process. I also don't think that these providers should be blocking access to apps or other functionality on the internet. So I don't think those things should be repealed as part of the current investigation of whether or not Title II will be repealed. However, the part about multiple speed access to the internet, multi-lane access, I think that is inevitable. And I believe whether or not you like it or not, we're going to have to become comfortable with it, because we already have other mechanisms in place for dealing with it. This may happen as soon as this Thanksgiving. Does that mean I'm done now? This has been going on in terms of the repeal process for over a year, and there's been many, many millions of people who provided their commentary whether or not they think net neutrality is something that they should really get on board. It's really interesting as well to watch the different companies who are on board, what side they're on. So you have some companies who are on both sides because they're placing bets on both sides. They're not quite sure how it's going to work out. But broadly speaking, you've got all the different content providers, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, they're on one side. And they say information needs to be free and at the same speed. Why? Because they have an interest in people basically clicking on their ads at the same speed and making money from it. Just today, the Wall Street Journal reported 3 of those companies made 30-something% increased profits. So obviously they have an interest in what they would call net neutrality because they have a financial interest in it. On the other side, you've got companies who are the broadband providers, like Comcast, Time Warner, Spectrum, which is a rather small provider, and so on. They tend to be on the other side. We should be able to provide tiered access because they are providing what we would call a modern day sewer system. Right? They provide the pipes to deliver all this content. And if you want to have a small pipe or a large pipe, they get more money if you have a large pipe. More content for you. But it's not quite as clear as that, of course, because the content providers also provide some of the pipes. Google provides, for example, broadband fiber access in many cities in the country. So they're on both sides. Now, did you watch the John Oliver blurb already? Yeah. Did it show who are the major lobbyists in Washington? Did we see that part? Did you see that part? So if you go online, you watch there's 2 John Oliver blurbs. John Oliver is a great investigative journalist who just masks himself as a comedian, right? But he's a modern investigative journalist. And I believe he said the top tier group who provides money to Congress in terms of lobbying is Northrop Grumman. And number 2 are the broadband service providers. So they have millions of dollars invested in this. So that's one of the reasons why the social media emphasis that John Oliver provided about go FCC yourself. By the way, if you go to gofccyourself.com, it goes right to the FCC site. It's been shut down. I don't know why, but we could talk about why, but it only goes to the FCC now, because basically the conversation about the input from the population, us, into what should be done will be very, very different. There's also a whole discussion related to privacy, and the current FCC administration wants to move some of the privacy conversations out of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, to the FTC. Because if you think about all the information that's being sent on the internet as envelopes, right? And they just look on the outside, what's on the envelope, and it gets sent to the next person. Internet traffic is sent using what is called hops, very different than our normal mail. So I would send it, I would say, it's not me, I sent it to you. You say, not me, but I think it's closer to me. You send it to that person, that person, that person, that person, eventually gets to where it needs to go. But if I open up the envelope, I can see what's inside. And that's how technically net neutrality is done. I open up the envelope and I say, well, this is going from Orlando and it's going to Scott's house. But if I open it up and says, oh, but it looks like it's Netflix traffic. I'm going to turn that down a little bit because we have a special deal with Amazon Prime. And Amazon Prime or Hulu, they're paying us extra money. So we go, we dial it down a little bit. What I'm telling you is if you signed up for Amazon Prime or Hulu, you'd get better service. If you're getting Netflix, sorry for you, you're back to the dial-up age. Right? But as soon as you open up the envelope, I can see what's inside. Then I can see things like, maybe there's malware in there. That is like a virus. Or maybe there's content in different parts of the world that is against the current government. I'm not going to slow that down. I'm going to totally block it. You'll never see it. So the ability to open up those envelopes and examine what's inside means that whoever is in control of these major pipes has control completely of all the content that goes across the internet. And we've only got about 3 main providers. They're called backbone providers in the country. And if we provide them access to be able to do that, we provide them access to look at basically all of your mail. And it's a lot of mail. But we have very powerful computers can open it up very much faster than the post office can. So we can do it very, very fast. So it is not a simple conversation. There's benefits to be able to block viruses and malware being transferred over the internet. Calm down, Watson. But there's also very grave societal implications related to having a government body, whoever they may be, looking at all the content that you send online. And by the way, this only applies to content that is sent within the United States, within continental U.S. As soon as you start sending information that goes outside the U.S., international boundaries, it's totally different. You should be aware that anything you send or receive internationally is already examined. That's part of what the NSA and other organizations do as part of our information security. The question is really whether or not we do it internally. Okay. Panting and questions.
Envelopes. What are the different ways of sending?
When you send information on the internet, you don't really have a choice. I don't want to get too technical. You kind of have a choice, but broadly speaking, you don't. Let's say you're sitting at home, and you send an email from home to your friend who's in Los Angeles. And you type away, and then you say send. And the information that kind of gets packaged up as packets. They're literally called packets on the internet. And if you send like a 3-page letter, 3 pages long, it gets broken up into packets of certain length. It's kind of like you sliced and diced it. And each part of that you're slicing has still the same address, something, Los Angeles, and off it goes. But when they arrive, they could arrive in different order. They arrive, part 2, part 3, part 1. But the other side knows how to put them all together. And how it gets broken up is not up to you either. And whether you've got an embedded little, your cute cat video or your picture of your dog or whatever it might be, you don't have a choice of that. And they don't have a choice of how it gets reassembled. But because those are standards, that is when it goes from here to there through multiple hops, anyone can look at it. The only way you can't look at it is if it's encrypted. That means it's stored in a way that everyone who opens up the envelope, it looks like gobbledygook to them. But most people don't use encrypted email or encrypted traffic. So you don't really have a choice. The whole part of net neutrality, however, is you're sending email, and your friend in Los Angeles is watching Netflix, and when you send email, you expect it to arrive nearly instantaneously. They might say, well, you know what? It'll arrive in 2 days. It's like third-class mail now. You didn't put the proper postage on it because you didn't pay Verizon or Comcast or whoever it might be who are running all the backbone, the big networks, enough money. So it'll get there. It's kind of like sending messages by ship to Asia or to Europe. It takes forever, right? It eventually gets there, but it doesn't get there quickly. And you don't have a choice in the matter. So, yes, so if you open up Google, you search for, how to keep a dog quiet. That's what I'm searching for. And your internet service provider, your broadband provider, has a special relationship with, say, Bing, which is Microsoft search engine. And they say any search you're going to do is going to go through us, not through Google. So you will never, ever search through Google again. Anything you type in is going to go through Bing. And you may be perfectly happy with that, or you may not be happy with that, but you don't have a choice. So when I said I think it's inevitable that this sort of tiering, or fast lane, slow lane, or fast lane, medium will happen, I do believe it's inevitable. However, as I said, I'm against blocking access or blocking access. Those will be not good things. Those are places where we do have a role to play for the federal government to step in and say, no, we will not do this. But in terms of speed for access, I believe the market should play a role here. The problem we have is that we have only one provider, generally, right? If we only have Spectrum here, and I can't get AT&T, and I can't get Verizon's Fios, which is a fiber optic cable system, then I have no choice. I've only got one provider. But imagine you have 10. Well, as soon as the market comes into play, when you have 10 providers, one of them at least is going to say, I will provide you at least twice as fast as they will for the same price. Then I don't need the government oversight. I'll say, my business is going to move to you. We don't have that yet because internet access is still treated as if it was a utility, like water or sewer or electricity. We have one provider. It definitely shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is now. If you look at the way the country is carved up in terms of major providers, it looks like a cartel, right? This part of Florida, South Florida, and you go to the Atlantic states and New England, it's all one company. It shouldn't look like that. What it should look like is everyone can get everything from anywhere they want. You just pay the fee you would like for the service you want. But right now we don't have that. And that is definitely a role that the federal government has to play. I don't think it's so much about regulation in terms of content. It should be regulation in terms of openness. I had planned on having a few slides here for you before I had a doggy issue, before I came here. And one of them was, I was going to show you the very first page of the FCC Title II ruling from 2 years ago. So what I just told you is contained in a very brief document, 400 pages long. That is 400 pages of government legalese about what is Title II related to internet access. It's written in a way as if you read your Verizon bill and you'll have no idea if this is right. I don't know, right? Every month you look at your cell phone bill, your cable bill, and you look at it and go, yeah, I might be right, I don't know. I'll just pay it because I have no idea if it's correct. That's the way these other government regulations are written. But it can be summarized in like 3 pages. So there is no new statute that overrides yet this part of Title II yet. Although, as I said, all the rumors that I read, of course the internet is a good source of rumors, is that this may happen by Thanksgiving. And the reason why Thanksgiving comes into play is a revision of Title II in terms of internet access. Is that if you release news about what will happen around Thanksgiving, it gets buried in Black Friday ads. So you won't even see it. Now, again, I don't know what part or all of Title II that they will revise. I don't know. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. So the FCC is the head of the FCC, the current FCC head, his name is Ajit Pai, and he's very much a sort of a pro-market gentleman. The previous person was more of a regulation person. So this does change with administrations. That's why there was a difference between 2015 and now. In 2015, however, there was nowhere near the amount of public participation in the conversation of what should happen with net neutrality or not. Since then, the vast majority of people who have gone online to gofcc.com and other places have been basically saying, don't do this. We want an open internet. Now, in their defense, the current administration has not said we're not against open internet. We're just against something that's going to stifle innovation. Typically, whenever you have more regulation, you have less innovation, right? And it does seem odd to regulate a utility, if you want to call it that, like the internet, using something from 1934, where we had Ma Bell. And those regulations are what are being used right now to regulate internet access. And I was going to show you a chart that showed where do we place ourselves in terms of high-speed internet access. We have countries like Estonia. You know where Estonia is? You do? Well, I've never been there. It sounds wonderful. They have better internet access than we do. We pay more and get less. Because as soon as these regulations went into effect in 2015, boop, almost all the financial investment into improving our backbone and internet access all right to the home stopped. It stopped because all the companies are wondering, well, what is the government going to require us to do? So, a country like us, we shouldn't be number 26 or 27 in the list behind Estonia. We should be number 1. But we're not. And it's stalled for the last 2.5 years. It's stalled like that for the last 2.5 years, in large part because of this Title II regulation. I mean, after all these companies provide you internet access, their main goal is for you to use more of it. These companies who made massive profits, like Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, and Amazon and Microsoft, those are 3 companies reported profits today, all up over 30%, in the billions of dollars. They're not going to continue to make these billions of dollars of profit if you can't go online rapidly and buy your next movie. Their interest is in you buying more and more by enabling your access. So they would that's why I said the companies are both against it and for it. They're both on both sides. But actually they're only ever on one side. And it's not your side. It is on the financial side. however it might be presented from a public perception point of view, however their lobbyists present their work, their main goal is to liberate money from your pocketbook to them, right? That is their main goal. Whether it's pro-net neutrality or anti-net neutrality or both, it really doesn't matter as long as they get more money. I understand that. That's why we pay for these, well, we use these services for almost no money. You can always choose not to use them. You could choose not to use Google. Hands up, who here uses Bing? You poor lonely people. I think I saw 3 hands, but the other people don't even, what's Bing? They're saying, what's Bing? Yep. And then you keep using Google. Does Bing still get in? Oh, they may. So many people think, well, we shouldn't enter into this revision of the net neutrality clause because it wouldn't be good. And my answer to you is, we already do this. So when you send email from ourselves to Los Angeles, and you may be on with customer service occasionally, right? It said, I've just sent you an email confirming your order. And you keep clicking get mail, get mail, get mail. You're waiting for it to arrive. And eventually it arrives. A few minutes, a few hours, whatever it might be. And then you go back to your TV room and you watch your Netflix, and it's in ultra 4K HD, super clear, and it's never pixelated. It's like perfect. Like, wait a minute, how did Netflix do that? When it takes my email hours to get there, and it's just like text. And these guys are streaming content that looks beautiful, and it's the same pipe. They're able to do it because they already have what are called peering relationships with the major backbones. So Amazon and Netflix and all these other companies already have special relationship between where they send the movie from to the backbone. The backbone is like the big pipe. It's like the pipe that goes under your street, right? They already have a special relationship with them that has a priority connection to send lots of information very fast. So we already have this. So in many ways, the whole discussion of net neutrality is moot. We already do it. It is not neutral at all. And we benefit from it because if you didn't like watching Netflix in ultra 4K HD, you'd complain to them. That's how the market works. So how this is all going to play out in the future is a really big open question. But it does affect everyone. As I said, it already affects you now because in general, you can watch what you want. You can get the content you want. The difficulty would be if we had a different administration that starts turning the screws on things like censorship. That would be very different. Yes, sir.
Google's YouTube and Twitter and other sites on the internet, Facebook, have been censored more and more and more.
Yeah.
It even happened to Professor Jordan Peterson of the University of Toronto. Totally.
The world needs more Canada, by the way. I just said the world needs more Canada from Canada. Thanks for that setup. I loved it.
I've seen a rise in VPN networks, virtual private networks.
Yes.
And I personally use them, so I see the difference exactly what we're talking about. That basically you get blocked and blocked and everything when you're on a regular direct connection with a VPN.
So a VPN, if you don't know what it is, it stands for Virtual Private Network. It's kind of a way of masking your origin, where you come from. So this may be a surprise to you, but I like soap operas. But I only like one. I like EastEnders, yeah, which is a soap opera from the UK. And unless you're in the UK and you go to the BBC website, you can't watch it because they use what are called geolocator services. They say, oh, you're coming from Melbourne, Florida. You're not from London, England. Our license only allows you to see this if you're in London. Why is that? Because I'm not paying the stupid old TV fee that they have in England, which everyone in England has to provide to be able to watch content. It's a fee everyone provides. So I can use a virtual private network. Virtual means it changes, and private means it's secure. It's a network. So I go online, I use this VPN service, and I pretend that if I'm sitting in London, and boop, all of a sudden I can watch EastEnders. Pardon? Yes, and it becomes a game like whack-a-mole. Every time a virtual private network thing pops up, the BBC hits it down, right? Because these new addresses, it says, I'm from Melbourne. They say, oh, you're not from Melbourne. You're not from London, you're from Melbourne. Whack. And I say, okay, now I'm from Melbourne. Like, no, you're not. Whack. And they keep hitting them down. So it is a constant game. But virtual private networks are used in many countries. So I travel to China a lot. And in China, sites like Facebook and so on, they're blocked. You cannot use them at all. That's what I meant by censorship. Because absolutely everything you do there is monitored, including opening up the envelopes. So the universities and the students know this, of course, and they have a constant chase game, which is the government blocks a particular website, and the university students find a new virtual private network that is open. They send their messages out until it gets closed again, and they keep moving. So every time I go there, I have to talk to the students and find out what's the current VPN addresses that I can use. Still knowing that it's still viewed, as they're still open, but at least I can send the messages out. Otherwise, I cannot do anything. So we absolutely do not want to get to that level of oversight. We want kind of a sweet spot between it. Yes, sir. Okay, so you didn't hear the question. Was what government agency would be, if we're going to transition some oversight into this activity, what would be the best government agency? The FCC, the FTC, or others? Probably the NSA. That would probably be the best agency to transition because they're already looking at everything anyway, right? And now that I've said their name, they're listening. They're hello. Of course they are. That was the difference when I meant by traffic that goes in the U.S. versus goes outside the U.S. Everything that goes outside the U.S., whether it's cell phone or internet, is subject to very different rules of oversight. We're only talking about things that are internal. The challenge, however, is when you send messages from here to Los Angeles, there's nothing that says it couldn't be bounced off a server in Toronto. Because it takes very, very strange paths when it gets there. And if a message goes from here to Canada, back to the US, now it enters Canadian jurisdiction. And Canada might have different rules about who provides oversight of internet content, packets, whether or not they open up the envelopes, and everything else. And you don't know. So many government organizations in different countries have rules about, you've heard about storing your records in the cloud. So in Canada, for example, they have legislation that prevents the government, federal government, or the provincial governments from storing things like medical records outside of the Canadian physical location. So you might have a service like Dropbox, which is based in the US. They will never allow medical records to be stored in Dropbox because they would be within US jurisdiction. That means they would be subject to subpoena within the US. And India and other countries are like this. But in general, we don't think about this. We think about the world as being just all connected. But there are still physical and geographical boundaries of where this content goes through. And every time it transitions or goes through one of these boundaries, there are legal repercussions. They haven't been in the news too much, but they will be. They will be. So the answer to your question, whether it should be FCC, FTC, right now it's under the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. And they're thinking about moving some parts of the privacy part, which is when you open up the envelopes, to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. I think that might happen. They might actually split the jurisdiction two of these things. But probably the FCC is probably the proper organization of where it should be. I can't imagine where a consumer-oriented organization within the federal government would be better placed. Any other questions? Yes, sir. I didn't hear the first part of your question, but a bandwidth limitation?
Yeah, otherwise if you have true net neutrality, could you implement based on bandwidth?
Oh, okay. Well, this is related to the question I often get asked, which is technically, could we implement net neutrality now? And remember, the name is actually is the opposite of what you think. Implementing net neutrality means making the content not neutral. And so it's the opposite of what you think of. And the answer is yes. It's actually trivially easy to do now. We already do it. If you have a cell phone plan, and it might say you have 3 gigabytes of data per month. And okay, so let's take a question. Who watched Netflix last night? You can admit it. It's a legal service. You can admit it. And how many gigabytes did you use? Who knows, right? No, I don't know. I watched a movie and a half. I don't know how many gigabytes I used. No one knows. But it is tracked, of course. And if you're using your cell phone to watch things like ESPN Mobile, to watch basketball games and so on live, you're using data, a certain part of your monthly allocation of bandwidth. And many of the cell phone providers, when you start getting close to your allocated bandwidth, whether it's, let's say, 3 gigabytes, 4 gigabytes per month, start dialing down your speed. That's called throttling. And that's what part of net neutrality is about. So it already exists now, because they look at the packets that are going through and saying, this is coming from ESPN. This looks like basketball. Dial back, dial back. So you don't see it as much because you're already using too much of your bandwidth. So whenever you sign up for a cell phone plan or a broadband service provider plan where it says unlimited internet access per month, you know there's always a little asterisk at the end, right? And unlimited has a different definition than common definition. Unlimited means subject to certain caps. And those caps are implemented on a monthly basis. So technically we already know how to do this. I mean, we already do it. So net neutrality is not a technical problem. It is a public policy issue. It is not a technical issue. We already do the same sort of thing, monitoring content for malware and viruses. And if you're in countries like China or other places that are provide more of a totalitarian oversight of the internet, then they look at everything. Because all these packets that are sent have information in them. It's not just your email. It says where it's coming from, where it's eventually going to, and information such as the priority of the packet. It's called quality of service. And the type of information, is it text, is it multimedia, whatever it might be. And all these computers, as they see these packets flying by, look at it. And say, oh, fast lane, slow lane, oh, nowhere, I'm going to take that one. So it's actually easy to do. It's just done at scale. It's done it for millions and millions and millions of messages that are sent all the time. But for better or worse, we have the ability to do it. And we actually sell the computing equipment made here to other countries to do it. Just to be clear, we sell the equipment to block access to all this content to other countries. I won't say who. But it's a big business. So we are in fact enablers of this in other parts of the world. Yes, sir. You have a question, gentlemen? So why did the ISPs stop improving their service when net neutrality came into effect 2 years ago? because in part they weren't sure what the next set of regulations would be. In general, if you're for sort of a free market capitalist, that means you think everything should go, and the internet has always been sort of a wild west. Then you think that everyone should be able to do whatever they like online, and if someone wants to come up with a faster service, but it is not subject to government oversight, I should be able to provide it to you. But they weren't sure what was going to happen. And everything in terms of the hints of what was coming was not just Title II, it was actually more and more oversight. And more oversight says, well, if you're already going to throttle back our access and our bandwidth and everything else, we don't have an incentive to keep improving it. So we stopped, which is why we're behind Estonia. I mean, as of 2 years ago, we were like number 26 in the world. That's terrible. Yes, sir.
Looking back in history, just a brief time when there was so much criticism of radio years ago, and then we didn't have pirate radio set up just because that's the work. And they were not limited by 55 CW limit, so they could broadcast 100,000 watts, no problem. Sure.
Yep.
And so, in a similar mode, when UCC regulated the building of free channel in England, when we didn't have power stations set out in the North Sea on boats, instead we could stream in anything they wanted to, broadcast anything they wanted to. So where's the parallel?
So, if I understand your question, was in the past we could have pirate radio stations and other radio stations that could broadcast very high power that would sort of overwhelm local stations, right? So we have a local AM station here right now that broadcasts with 50,000 watts. Now, as an aside, I've been waiting to say this. You know the Voyager probe, the Voyager from 40 years ago? It broadcasts with 22 watts. And it's 12 billion miles away. And if you want to hear more about that, come on December 1st. You'll hear more about it. But we have radio stations broadcasting at 50,000 watts, and you could have another radio station close by that broadcasts at 100,000 watts. They would overwhelm the local station. But the internet doesn't work that way. There's no notion of whoever yells louder is heard more. But what I can do instead is, when you tune into a station, let's say you're going to 1240 AM. That translates to an IP address, an Internet Protocol address. There's a series of 4 digits, like 192.168.100.1. It's like a postal address. I can control that address if I'm in a different country. So if you're in Mexico and you dial up that number, and you're expecting to get 100,000 watts of piñata-related music, you're not. Because of that geolocation service, it's, oh, you're coming from Mexico? You're going to get the government current news feed. And I can completely block that other feed, and you can only get this one. Again, unless you're using something like a virtual private network, which the average person doesn't understand how to use. I mean, there are always ways around this. But the average person doesn't know it, doesn't want to pay for it, they cost money, and they're complicated. So it's not so much a question of volume, it's a question of destination. And I can control where you're going to go whenever you type in that address. And that's what's done already. That's how they block. If you're in China and you want to go to Facebook, you type facebook.com or whatever it might be, and you don't go anywhere. They just totally block access to the content. Yes, sir? They'll check it because of the 143 million records that were stolen from Equifax. Yes. And
so, then there's tie-in that goes with that. It's like they're going to ask for permission to gather still more data on you so that they'll have better stable content.
Yes, yes. What is called the dark web is just parts of the internet they're accessible to everyone, but they're not accessible via search engines in general. So if you were searching for something, I don't know, doggy daycare, for example, and you go online and type in Google doggy daycare emergency, right? And you'd find a bunch of places on Google or Bing or whatever it might be. But there's another set of places that are not indexed by the search engines, and that's called the dark web. It's dark because the light isn't shined on it. You can't easily find it. But what is on the dark web? Well, as the name suggests, not good things. Things like child pornography, drug purchasing online using things like virtual currency like bitcoins. That said, you'd be incredibly naive to think that you are anonymous on the dark web. We've spoken a lot about our federal government. Our federal government is made up of a lot of really smart people, thankfully. They monitor this all the time. So it is dark to us, but it is not dark to everyone. So going there is like, it's like going underground, right? But we can place agents underground, and they do the same thing online. Good question. Yep. Ah. So the question was whether or not internet access should be a utility or not, and what are the implications of that. So Title II reclassified broadband access as a telecommunications service. That's why it was able to roll all of your ISP access under the old common carrier rules. And you know, I haven't had a landline since 1996, personally. But if I remember looking at those old bills, I remember things like, you have access fees, right? And part of it is to subsidize folks who are living out in split lip Arkansas or wherever they're living, and because they got a big price to pay to run the lines out to these places where they live. So we subsidize their telecommunication access. And this model for the internet is the same thing. We're going to subsidize access for places where there are very limited accessibility choices. The intention of repealing Title II is to reclassify the internet as an information service, not a telecommunication service. An information service is not subject to all these Title II regulations. Now, but the question is, well, what do you do if you only have one choice or very little? Have you heard what's happening in Puerto Rico right now in terms of internet access? One of the companies I mentioned, which is Alphabet, parent company of Google, are floating balloons over Puerto Rico. They were planning on doing this. They've tried it in a number of small studies, but they got permission to do it in we'll call it a federal accelerated way. It took them a month, but an accelerated manner, so to provide cell phone access to people where all the towers have been blown down. And these are very high floating balloons, and the balloons communicate with one another using what is called a mesh network. And you pick up your phone, you don't need a cell tower anymore because it's going up to a balloon. So there are technical innovations available for almost everywhere, and they want to be deployed in places like Asia, Africa, and other places where developing the internet infrastructure for landlines and others are very, very expensive. So there are technical innovations, and when the young man asked why did they stop investing in these, that would be an example. Because they think, well, if we start putting up balloons to provide internet access, it'll be regulated. We don't know what that'll imply, so we're not going to do it here. So the innovation starts happening outside the country. It's like drones. We already have drone delivery. You've heard about it for Amazon, drone delivery, little buzzer. This is not the future. This is now, just not here. And it's not here because the FAA won't allow it. They do it in England. They do it in parts of Canada already. So it's not a technical issue. It is an oversight and regulatory issue. The main solution, in my opinion, to your problem, which is what to do when you've only got one provider, is have more than one provider. And to have more than one provider, you need less regulation. Let everyone come in and try and make some money. If they can make some money, you'll have more than one person providing access. Otherwise, you won't. When you've only got one provider, that is when the government provides oversight, like a utility. But I hope it's a transitionary phase. Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let me summarize by saying your question was really about whether or not internet access should be a utility, and we should have, say, municipal regulated access to it, like we do for water, electricity, and other. So I personally think, let's take electricity. It's something that, how many electricity providers do you choose from here? As far as I know, it's just one. You can either have candles or electricity. That's pretty much your choice. What if you had 5 choices of electricity provider? What did remember I write for Florida Today. What was on the front page of Florida Today today? Yeah, like $1.3 billion of FPL going to pass on the cost of Irma to you. Right? But the way utilities work right now, they are highly regulated, and they're considered public service utilities. Right? So FPL doesn't provide electricity for the whole state; it provides it for the majority of the state. There are other providers, but when it comes to geographical area, they kind of carve it up. Right? But what is coming in terms of electricity? The production of electricity and the distribution on the grid are things like solar. Right? So at some point, we may have buildings that are engineered where your roof doesn't require all those nasty-looking solar panels. Just the roof tiles themselves are solar panels. So you don't need FPL anymore. In fact, if you have a big enough roof, you might in fact provide electricity to your neighbors. You are both a provider, a generator, and a provider of electricity to your local grid. Right? That'll totally disrupt the current model of how electricity is consumed in the country. Now, in some parts of the country, people can choose to pay extra money, say, I want a certain part of my electricity to come from a renewable energy source, like wind. Electricity still comes over the same lines. But what you're doing is saying, I'm going to provide a little bit of extra money. Instead of coming from gas-fired or coal-fired, it's going to come from wind when it comes from the generation station. Why couldn't we do the same thing for internet access? We may eventually do this. I don't think we'll ever do it for water, because water is a very different commodity, and it always comes from a local municipality. The other thing in the news recently, of course, was the big main water pipe break in Cocoa, right? Yeah. So wouldn't it be nice if you just call up and say, you know what, I don't like that Cocoa water anymore. I'd like West Melbourne water, please. And from then on, you're going to get West Melbourne water. But you can't, because the pipe, the physical pipe, is connected to Cocoa if you're living there. But the internet is not like that. It is virtual. It is not physical. It can come from anywhere. So it keeps coming back to, do you think you are best served by having a municipal or other level of government providing oversight and regulation on your access to the internet as if it was a basic utility, or it should be something you pay for outside of your taxes? That's a different question. One second. You have a question, sir? Yes. So I'm not sure if the question was about the use of antitrust regulation to break up our current internet providers. I'm not sure if that's. I would prefer just to open things up to more competition rather than regulating access. Yeah. Please. Yes, yes. So I think we all agree having a monopoly on anything is a bad thing. Having choice is always a good thing. And it tends to obviate the need for increased regulation because the market tends to make accessible products or services that people want and better choices.
Is it difficult to develop competition when the monopolies are the connections to the properties?
Yes, it is. So if we were looking at, the question was whether or not it's difficult to develop this sort of competition. So if you get it back into the Wayback Machine and you think about the days of AOL dial-up access, right? You've got mail. I remember those days. And it doesn't seem like that long ago, actually. So we had a modem, and you connected over your physical telephone line, which I told you I haven't had since 1996, so it tells you how long ago it was. You could have other internet service providers providing internet access over your telephone line. So in 1996, I was living in Southern California. So the internet, the phone company, I forget what even they were called, let's call it like Ma Bell. Okay? But my internet might have been coming from like Earthlink, another provider. So Earthlink didn't come out and run another telephone line to my house. They just had a usage agreement with AT&T or Ma Bell for the actual physical line that was required by the government that said you must give access to second-tier providers to your physical infrastructure. If they want to offer the same service at a lower cost, you have to provide it. Now you can imagine if you were AT&T, you wouldn't be very happy about this. So I just spent billions of dollars running lines and wires and stuff to everyone's home and digging up the ground, and then another company comes in and says, that's wonderful, we'll just use that. And we'll come in at $5 less a month to offer internet access. And they weren't happy. So what is the solution? The solution really is a different technical solution. Well, don't use the wires. Go wireless. Go balloons. Go some other mechanism. Go the power grid. You can go online using the power grid, you know. So go another mechanism that obviates the need for these actual lines. That comes back to the innovation. Open up things to innovation. You have different ways of getting online. I'm just blah, blah, blah here. So.
You can come and talk to the speaker that's listening, Dr. Philip and Dr. Iran.
Oh, okay. Thank you.